The sun hung high over Buckingham Palace, casting its golden light across the historic courtyard. Tourists, locals, and royal admirers gathered with eager anticipation, waiting for one of Britain's most revered traditions, the changing of the guard. The spectacle was a familiar one, an event filled with precision, discipline, and ceremony. But on this particular day, something out of the ordinary was about to unfold, capturing the hearts of everyone present. At first, everything proceeded as expected. The rhythmic sound of marching boots echoed through the courtyard, the red-clad guards standing in perfect formation, their movements synchronized in a display of unyielding discipline. The crowd watched with admiration, snapping photos and murmuring among themselves about the grandeur of the moment. However, amidst the meticulously rehearsed routine, a single guard stood out, his stance unwavering, his salute held high. Unbeknownst to most, this was not just another soldier on duty. This was Corporal Thomas Bennett, a veteran who had recently returned from active service overseas, carrying both the scars of battle and the weight of personal conviction. Unlike his fellow guards, Bennett was injured, his leg still recovering from a serious wound. And yet, despite the pain, despite the blistering heat, he refused to move. At first, only a few noticed, but as the minutes stretched into an hour, whispers began to spread. Who was this man? Why did he stand there so still, defying exhaustion and discomfort? Soon, what began as a routine ceremony was turning into something extraordinary. Standing at attention in the heart of the Buckingham Palace courtyard, Corporal Thomas Bennett embodied the very essence of duty. A seasoned soldier and a man of unwavering loyalty, Bennett had recently returned from a grueling overseas mission, one that had left him with a serious leg injury and a deeper sense of purpose. For most, such an injury would warrant rest, recovery, and perhaps even a temporary reprieve from duty. But for Bennett, the call to serve remained stronger than any physical pain. Determined to honor his fallen comrades, he insisted on resuming his post, refusing any special treatment. His superiors had urged him to reconsider, cautioning that prolonged standing could exacerbate his injury. But Bennett was resolute. "If they could sacrifice everything, I can endure a few hours," he had told a fellow soldier before reporting for duty. As the changing of the guard commenced, he took his place, his posture rigid, his arm raised in a salute that did not waver. His sharp uniform clung to him beneath the heat of the summer sun, but he ignored the discomfort. At first, the crowd barely noticed him. After all, the guards were trained to be nearly indistinguishable from one another. But soon, something about him began to stand out. His face, partially shadowed by his hat, bore signs of strain. His breathing grew shallow. A faint tremor began to course through his body as he fought against the relentless pain radiating from his injured leg. And yet, despite all this, he did not move. Minutes turned into an hour. Then another. The heat bore down on him, but his stance remained firm. The crowd, initially distracted by the grand ceremony, began to sense that something unusual was happening. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as more and more people noticed the solitary figure standing in unyielding tribute. To Corporal Bennett, this wasn't just a ceremonial duty. It was a deeply personal tribute, a silent act of remembrance for those who had given their lives in service. And despite the agony, despite the exhaustion, he refused to break his stance. As time passed, more people in the crowd began to notice the lone guard who stood motionless, his salute unwavering. At first, they assumed it was simply part of the routine. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and then into two, murmurs of curiosity turned into quiet admiration. And then, concern. Near the front of the crowd, an elderly man, himself a retired soldier, nudged his wife and whispered, "That young man is standing there despite an injury. That's not just duty, that's a tribute." His wife nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion as she watched Corporal Bennett battle through what was clearly immense discomfort. Nearby, a young girl no more than 8 years old clutched a small Union Jack flag and tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mummy, why is he standing so still? He looks like he's in pain." Her mother hesitated, glancing toward the steadfast soldier, before replying softly, "Because it's his duty, sweetheart." The whispers continued to spread. Some onlookers tilted their heads, shading their eyes from the sun as they tried to make sense of what they were witnessing. Others began pointing, their voices hushed yet tinged with awe. Then came the small but telling signs of struggle. The faint trembling in Bennett's arms, the barely perceptible shift in his weight as he tried to relieve the pressure on his injured leg. A light sheen of sweat coated his forehead, evidence of the battle he was fighting not just against the elements, but against his own body. Despite this, his resolve did not falter. He kept his gaze locked forward, his posture unyielding. The crowd, which had originally gathered for a spectacle, now found themselves witnessing something far greater: a display of courage, endurance, and an unbreakable sense of duty. By now, even the palace guards had taken notice. Though trained to remain composed, a few exchanged subtle glances, silently acknowledging the sheer willpower of their fellow soldier. Still, no one stepped forward. No one interrupted. The atmosphere shifted from that of a typical tourist attraction to something almost sacred. A deep reverence settled over the courtyard as people stood in silent support. It was no longer just about watching a ceremony. It was about witnessing a moment of extraordinary human resilience. And just when it seemed that this act of silent tribute had reached its peak, something completely unexpected happened. Word of the Lone Guard's unwavering stance reached the highest ranks of Buckingham Palace. Inside Buckingham Palace, Prince William and Princess Catherine were finishing an important meeting with representatives from a veterans organization. Both had long been dedicated to supporting the armed forces, particularly those who struggled with the transition back to civilian life. William, having served in the military himself, understood firsthand the challenges of service. Kate, too, had worked extensively with military families, offering them the compassion and support they needed. As the meeting came to a close, a palace attendant stepped in, his voice respectful but urgent. "Your Royal Highness, there is something happening outside that I believe you should be aware of." William and Kate exchanged a glance before listening intently as the attendant quickly explained the situation unfolding in the courtyard. A lone guard, Corporal Thomas Bennett, had been standing for hours despite an injury, refusing to break his salute. His dedication was not going unnoticed. The crowd had grown silent, watching in a mixture of admiration and concern. For a brief moment, William's expression shifted, his military instincts kicking in. He knew all too well what it meant to push through pain in service of something greater than oneself. The description of the injured soldier reminded him of his own time in uniform, of the men and women he had served alongside, who had endured hardships without complaint. He turned to the guard who had relayed the message and asked for more details. The response was succinct. "Corporal Bennett, just returned from duty, wounded in action during a peacekeeping operation." That was all William needed to hear. "Let's go to him," he said firmly, his decision immediate. Kate, who had been listening closely, gave a nod of agreement. She felt a deep respect for those who served, and the story of a man injured yet unwilling to step away from his duty moved her immensely. Without hesitation, she followed William as they made their way toward the courtyard, stepping outside into the summer heat. The unsuspecting crowd gasped as Prince William and Princess Kate appeared, their expressions filled with purpose. No fanfare, no royal announcement, just two figures walking with quiet determination, straight toward Corporal Bennett. The murmurs in the crowd quickly turned into a stunned silence as Prince William and Princess Kate stepped onto the courtyard, their eyes locked on Corporal Thomas Bennett. The royal couple, usually surrounded by formalities and carefully planned engagements, had arrived without any announcement. No speeches, no grand gestures, just a quiet, deliberate approach toward the injured soldier who had stood unwavering for hours. As they neared him, Bennett's eyes widened slightly, his disciplined posture remaining intact. Even in his exhaustion, even as his leg throbbed in relentless pain, he did not break his stance. Instead, he straightened further, standing even taller, as if his very soul refused to waver in the presence of his future king. Prince William stopped just a step away from Bennett, looking at the soldier not just as a prince, but as a fellow serviceman. There was no need for an introduction. The respect between the two men was unspoken, understood without words. In a voice both warm and firm, William spoke. "Corporal Bennett, you honor us all today. Thank you for your dedication." Bennett did not break his salute, but his eyes glistened with emotion, his exhaustion now mixed with something deeper: pride. He gave a respectful nod, holding his salute with the same determination that had kept him standing for hours. Beside William, Kate Middleton stepped forward with quiet grace. Her eyes, filled with genuine compassion, softened as she took in the sight of the exhausted yet steadfast soldier. "Your courage means so much," she said gently. "We are all grateful for your service and strength." For the first time, a faint smile flickered across Corporal Bennett's lips, a brief yet powerful acknowledgement of the princess's words. Kate, sensing the strain in his stance, turned to a palace attendant standing nearby and, without hesitation, made a request. "Please bring water." Within moments, a bottle of water and a small portable fan were brought over. But instead of simply handing them to Bennett, Kate did something unexpected. With the utmost care, she lifted the bottle to his lips, allowing him to take a sip without breaking his salute. The simple, thoughtful gesture did not go unnoticed. A hushed reverence spread through the courtyard. Tourists who had come to witness a royal tradition were now witnessing something far more profound, a moment of human connection that transcended rank, status, and ceremony. Then, in an act that no one had anticipated, Prince William took a step forward and gently placed a hand on Bennett's shoulder, a soldier's gesture of appreciation, respect, and solidarity. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and for a brief second, the world around them seemed to pause. And then, without saying a word, Prince William did something that no one expected. The courtyard was silent. The hundreds of onlookers, tourists, locals, veterans, watched in breathless anticipation as Prince William, future King of England, slowly raised his right arm in a salute. For a moment, time stood still. Shoulder to shoulder with Corporal Bennett, William mirrored his stance, his posture strong, his expression resolute. No words were exchanged, yet the message was clear: respect, solidarity, and an unbreakable bond between those who serve. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some instinctively lifted their own hands in salute, while others placed hands over their hearts. It was no longer just a tribute from a single soldier. It was a moment of collective reverence. Standing beside them, Kate's eyes glistened with emotion. She had always admired her husband's military service, but in this moment, it was something more. It was a recognition that this act was not about royalty, not about tradition, but about honor. Corporal Bennett felt the weight of the moment. His arm, which had trembled from exhaustion, now steadied. The pain that had gnawed at his injured leg seemed to fade as he stood tall, his strength renewed by the silent support of the man beside him. In the crowd, an elderly veteran wiped away a tear. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered to his wife. A young mother bent down to her son, whispering, "This is what real strength looks like. Remember this moment." A visitor from overseas, overcome with emotion, lifted his phone and captured the scene, knowing this was not just a memory for himself, but a moment that the world needed to see. And then, just as quietly as it had begun, the salute ended. As if in perfect synchronization, Prince William, Corporal Bennett, and Kate Middleton lowered their arms together. And in that instant, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Not for royalty, not for tradition, but for a soldier's unwavering dedication, and for the prince who stood beside him. The applause filled the courtyard, echoing against the palace walls. Some clapped, some cheered, others simply stood in reverent silence. But all knew that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Kate, ever the embodiment of grace, reached out and lightly squeezed Bennett's arm. A simple yet powerful gesture of gratitude. "You've shown us all what it means to stand for something greater than yourself," she said softly. And as the applause continued to swell, Corporal Bennett, exhausted, overwhelmed, but deeply proud, stood at ease for the first time in 3 hours. The applause rolled through the courtyard like a wave, a collective acknowledgement of duty, sacrifice, and honor. Corporal Bennett, now visibly exhausted, finally allowed himself to lower his stance. His body ached, his leg throbbed, but his heart swelled with something greater: pride, respect, and an indescribable sense of fulfillment. Prince William stepped forward, extending his hand. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a soldier's grip, firm and full of unspoken respect. "Corporal, you've done us all proud today," he said, his voice sincere. Bennett met his gaze, nodded, and shook his future king's hand. Standing beside them, Kate placed a gentle hand on the corporal's shoulder. Her expression was filled with admiration. "Your dedication is something we will all remember," she said, her voice steady but warm. The crowd, still captivated, watched in awe as this royal moment unfolded before them. Not a moment of pomp and pageantry, but of raw, human connection. As the applause began to settle, William turned to address the onlookers. His voice was clear, resonant. "Today, we have witnessed a remarkable act of dedication. Corporal Bennett's strength and sacrifice remind us of the courage that defines our armed forces. We are all honored by his service." The crowd responded with another round of applause, not just for the prince's words, but for the man who had stood, endured, and inspired. As the crowd began to disperse, many lingered, reluctant to let go of the moment they had just witnessed. Conversations were hushed, not out of disinterest, but out of reverence. Parents whispered to their children about what they had just seen, veterans wiped their eyes, and tourists, who had expected to capture a typical royal event, now carried home a story far more meaningful. For Corporal Bennett, the experience had been both humbling and affirming. He had stood in tribute to his fallen comrades, but in return, he had been honored in a way he never expected. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the palace, those who had witnessed the moment knew one thing for certain. This was more than just a changing of the guard. It was a testament to courage, compassion, and the unwavering spirit of those who serve.